Okay, hello, this is Dan with the Veterans for Peace Forum, and I want to welcome you all back. I had an interesting day today. Today we had the March Against Monsanto, which happens to be being done all over the world. Here in Portland, we had about 3,000 people, it seemed, 2,000 to 3,000. It was a great opportunity. I had a chance, I'm with the with Veterans for Peace, of course, but I'm also with the Agent Orange Relief and Responsibility campaign, and Monsanto is one of those corporations that was one of the manufacturers of Agent Orange. So I was asked to speak at the event today, and I want to kind of just read this to you because I think it's important that this is being done all over the world, and we want to make sure that people understand that this is also Memorial Weekend, and on Monday will be Memorial Day. So as this weekend is starting up, many activities are happening. Families are preparing for backyard barbecues, picnics, trips to the coast or the mountains. Others will honor fallen soldiers that lost their lives in wars past and present. Brian Wilson, age 71, Vietnam veteran, member of Veterans for Peace, Chapter 72 here in Portland, and Diane Wilson, an environmental activist, anti-war activist, an author from Texas and with Code Pink, and John Pope, age 48, construction worker, supporter of Veterans for Peace from Florida. All are fasting in solidarity with the Guantanamo prisoners on a hunger strike. This is the year, this year there is no other major what am I saying? This year there is also the Monsanto protests, which I said is happening all over the world. And Monsanto is at war with farmers, environmentalists, and families that want healthy, non-GMO pesticides and free foods. The name Monsanto triggers my PTSD. My heart breaks, and Vietnam is ever present. Old wounds surface, those are the memories. So I wrote this statement in solidarity with this march. The Vietnam War is unfortunately still a reality for millions of Vietnamese and Americans and their children who continue to suffer from the effects of Agent Orange. For 10 years, from 1961 to 1971, the U.S. military sprayed 20 million gallons of toxic herbicides, including Agent Orange, over large sections of Vietnam. Agent Orange contains dioxin, one of the most dangerous chemicals known to man. The World Health Organization considers dioxin to be a carcinogen, which causes cancer. The American Academy of Medicine classifies dioxin as a teratogen. I'm sorry, I can't pronounce oftentimes what I can write. But causes birth defects. People exposed to Agent Orange have died or become totally incapacitated by diseases that the U.S. government recognizes as related to dioxin exposure for purposes of paying compensation to Vietnam veterans in the United States. Children born to parents exposed to dioxin during the war, and people in areas of heavy spraying, hotspots, which are various areas in Vietnam which people are still suffering from horrible deformities. I served in areas of heavy dioxin spraying in Vietnam. Thought I had survived the war and would be able to return to a normal life until my firstborn son was hit by friendly fire, a chemical weapon that can cripple or kill. Casey was born with a cleft palate, prune belly, congenital heart disease, and other birth anomalies. He suffered a seizure that took him from his mother's arms to a pediatric ICU neonatal center here in Portland. In a few weeks, my wife and I were able to take Casey home. Our life was anything but normal. What with learning to care for Casey's special needs and the hundreds of doctor's appointments, a year later, our second child was born, healthy, beautiful baby girl. We named her Harmony. Casey and Harmony played, fought, laughed over the silliest things. They marveled at the world around them, and their love grew deep and inseparable. Arlene and I felt that we had been spared the worst prognosis for Casey's future. Then came the day for Casey to have heart surgery. It's a little too painful to tell that whole story, but Casey went into a coma after the surgery for 7 weeks, and while in my arms, Casey took his last breaths and was no more. You think you know pain, but the loss of my son was a bayonet to my heart, and I nearly lost my sanity. Grief took me to the depths of hell, but for the love of my wife and daughter, I would have perished. I know what it is like to be, now I know what it's like to be Vietnamese. To have your heart ripped out, to stand by helplessly watching your children suffer, to see them as prisoners in their own bodies and losing them because of a war that should never have been and a toxic chemical that never should have been used. Although it's been 52 years since the first spraying of Agent Orange in Vietnam, there's a Vietnamese newspaper that reported that 62 blood samples taken recently at random from residents of Da Nang all tested positive for dioxin. The project was sponsored by the Ford Foundation and the Hatfield Consultants. The ghosts of our children cry out for justice. It is time to repair the damage and to recognize the suffering of families and the Vietnamese and ours. We of the Vietnam Agent Orange Relief and Responsibility Campaign, along with Veterans for Peace, are now rewriting legislation to provide medical, rehabilitative, and social services compensation to Vietnamese victims of Agent Orange, remediation of dioxin contaminants in hotspots, that's to clean it up, medical services for children and grandchildren of U.S. Vietnam veterans and Vietnamese American-born with the same diseases and deformities. 52 years is long enough to wait to provide compensation for the victims of this shameful chapter in our nation's history. Thus today, on May 25th, 2013, as the legacy of Monsanto continues, its disregard for human, animal, and plant life of the very substance we need to survive, are poisoned or genetically modified with grave consequences for our future and the future of the planet. Therefore, we of the Vietnam Agent Orange Relief and Responsibility Campaign and Veterans for Peace are joining we joined the march today in solidarity with all the people across the world. And when we talk about losing a child, we have so much in common. And today's guests are very important to me, and that is the parents of Rachael Corrie. Today I have with me Cindy and Craig Corrie. Cindy and Craig are the parents of a human rights activist and observer, Rachael Corrie, who on March 16th, 2003, was killed by Israeli military, a Caterpillar D9R bulldozer in Gaza Strip. She tried to prevent the demolition of a Palestinian family home. Motivated by their daughter's work and an example, the Corries have dedicated themselves to the pursuit of justice and peace in the Middle East and have made numerous visits to the region, and most recently, in the fall of 2012, leading an interfaith peace builder delegation to Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza. Rachael wrote of the importance of making commitments to places and initiated one to Rafah and Gaza. And the commitment she made continues. Well, that's powerful. I don't even know where to begin sometimes with these things because they're very difficult. And but I know how it was for me when I lost my child. And that day, I don't know how, I mean, it must have been very, very difficult for you. But I remember seeing, like I try to remember my child as, those happy days, those moments when the two were playing. And I saw a video of Rachael when she was very young, and she was speaking at some conference, and could you tell us what that was?
Sure. She was 10 years old at the time, and the video's on YouTube.
Yeah.
And so I know many people have seen it, and if they haven't, they can go and find it. Her class, her entire school, it was the Lincoln Options Program in Olympia, Washington, where we live, was studying world hunger and the impact on children specifically. And they had spent a good long period of time really learning about this. And I believe it was the International Year of the Child. There was some special UN thing going on at the same time.
That's right.
Yeah. And so Rachel was blessed. She was blessed with teachers in this public school alternative program for kids that one of the principles of the program, it's still going, is that your community is global. Right. And so she really, I feel like she really got her bearings, in that school. But they studied world hunger, and then were looking for concrete things that they could do about it. And we live in the state capital, Olympia, Washington. And these kids went down and did a press conference at the state capitol. And one of the things in the video that you'll hear is that there were children who were dropping pebbles into a container. It made a sound. And in the background, if you go back and listen to it, each time a pebble was dropped, it represented another child in the world that was dying of hunger at that moment. And of course, it was continuous. Rachel, she always had a gift with words, and she wrote her own speech and delivered it there at the state capitol, this little 10-year-old. And you'll see, if you look at it, that she had really internalized all those words. She had the card in front of her where she could read them, but after she got started, she just went for it.
She did a great job.
Yeah, and one thing that Craig often points out about that is that the media came. They are at the state capitol pretty regularly. And that evening on Seattle TV stations, there were excerpts from this press conference. A piece of Rachel was a part of it. So these kids, these little 10-year-olds and 9-year-olds who had set out to kind of open other people's eyes to one of the issues that we deal with in the world, or should be dealing with in the world, very connected to Monsanto, by the way, food.
Right.
They succeeded in bringing that awareness, to many people. So we're just grateful that we have that bit of videotape.
That is so daring. I seem to remember that when it happened. I don't know, it must have got out in the news somehow, because I remember seeing that video, and then when I saw it again, going back on YouTube and looking for things, I saw it and I said, I've seen this before, I've seen this.
It was picked up, although the video of her, I think, really there was just a very short bit. And actually, what I saw on the Seattle stations, looking back at it in hindsight, is that there really a little bit of those cute kids, but then about 4 minutes of the actual problem. So it wasn't that, they just showed these cute kids. It was that they actually did achieve some semblance of coverage of that. I'm also thinking, when I was saying that, that's why I slowed down talking of, later on, that was right before Christmas, and we were at my cousin's house for Christmas meal with a whole big family there, and I have an uncle who has since died, but he was a very powerful, very conservative attorney. And so he's kind of angry about these, in his opinion, liberal teachers taking these cute kids to go forward with their liberal views. And so he's asking Rachel all about, you can't cure world hunger or anything, but Rachel's got her facts down. And so we were all watching, about 15 of us. My Uncle Don, who's a dear, loving person, was quizzing her, and she's answering him back, one after the other. And Rachel still remains the only person any of us in the family have ever seen argue Uncle Don to a standstill. Of course, when he's done, he feels about this big because he knows he's been arguing with a 10-year-old.
That is amazing.
But it was lovely, and all those parts of it, I thought,
Well, that's incredible. I noticed that you started a foundation in the name of
Right.
Rachel. Can you tell us a little bit about
Yeah.
the foundation and what you're doing
Yes.
currently?
Yes. We have the Rachael Corrie Foundation for Peace and Justice. It started actually back in 2003. We filed the papers to make that happen. Really motivated by a meeting that we had with Linda Beale. About 2 weeks after Rachael was killed, we were notified really by some friends, but also by people we didn't know very well, that Linda Beale, whose daughter had been killed in South Africa, when she was there on a Fulbright trying to register all South Africans for the first time, that everybody in the country could vote. And she was pulled from a car and very violently murdered. And her parents, knowing what her perspective was, knew what she would want to have happen. And they really devoted the rest of their lives working on issues in South Africa. And we're part of the Truth and Reconciliation process there. Actually ended up, I saw Linda Beale on a TV program, but knew she had done this on the stage with one of the people who had been found responsible for murdering her daughter. And he actually works for her in a part of their foundation that they had in South Africa. So 2 weeks after Rachael was killed, we were told that this woman, we hadn't heard of her before, was going to be in Seattle. We went up to the University of Washington and heard her speak and heard others there talking about, it was really the Iraq War that was unfolding at the time, right after Rachael was killed. And afterward, we had some time together, and she told us about what her family's journey had been since their daughter Amy had been killed. And she meant we knew about a foundation. And I also remember, because I asked her after Amy was killed, were you ever able to really reclaim part of your previous life? And she thought for a moment. She said, not really. And my daughter Sarah, who was with us, said she knew that was game over, that we were headed down a different path. But our foundation now is based in Olympia. We're a small 501c nonprofit. We focus primarily on Israel and Palestine, the Middle East, and the kinds of things that we're doing are to educate people, certainly, with everything that we're doing. That happens locally, but it also happens through our website, where we have a website, the Rachael Corrie Foundation website, and a lot of people do come there to get information, and we try to keep it updated about what's going on. We just give you some examples of some of the things that happen locally. The film The Gatekeepers, which is 6 of the living Shin Bet directors. It's an quite amazing film where they talk about.
Shin Bet is like would be like our CIA, I think, if they're
CIA,
responsible
FBI,
in
they have
Israel
for right, and
anti-terrorism.
The film is interesting because it talks about their how they feel like Israel's basically gone down not a very effective path. But we had a film discussion afterward, brought in some people. We're bringing a young woman actually working with the Corvallis Gaza Cultural Exchange. I don't know if you're aware of that group, but we partnered with them last year to bring a young woman from Gaza. They're working on a lot of Gaza Corvallis connections. We're working on Olympia, Rafah Gaza connections. And so Amani and Shasi will be returning to the United States. She'll spend time in Corvallis, and then she's going to come up to Olympia.
When is that?
She'll be in Olympia June 8th through the 15th, or leaves on the 15th. She's going to be in Corvallis prior to that. And we'll be doing some speaking in the Corvallis area.
I think doesn't she fly in a week from tomorrow?
She flies in, and everybody's very happy because the crossing that she needs to go through, the single crossing out of Gaza to go through, was recently closed for 5 days by the Egyptians because of incidents in the Sinai. But now it's open, so she'll be coming. So we have these educational events. We're starting something this year called the Rachael Corrie Foundation Leadership Studies Fellowship to bring a young person from Gaza interested, who now works at the Rachael Corrie Children and Youth Cultural Center with kids in like after school programs. He's interested in small nonprofit work, child trauma and education. So he's going to come to Olympia, share with us a lot of his experience and what he knows, and we'll be working with people in our community, if all goes well, we get him here, to learn more that he can take back and utilize in Gaza. We have the scholarships. We're really excited because we've managed a scholarship called the Iraqi Student Solidarity Committee Scholarship. It was founded by kids at the Evergreen State College some years ago, and through it, an Iraqi refugee student was able to get a tuition waiver at Evergreen, and then had support from our community and from donors from other places in order to be able to actually come to Evergreen and be able to live in Olympia. He's graduating, so we're going to have a graduation celebration for him. We have the Rachael Corrie Memorial Scholarship. We're working, we network a lot up and down certainly the West Coast,
Right.
but throughout the country. And we're a member of the U.S. campaign to end the Israeli occupation. It has over 400 groups, and we are one of those. And so we all try to work together to support each other and to educate people. And there's a lot of work with BDS.
Right.
Boycott.
And explain BDS.
Yeah. Well, why don't you do that? Yeah.
Because you were just at the Arab Spring at Portland State.
Yeah, we were. Yeah.
2
yeah.
years.
Well, BDS, which is Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions. So it's a call from the Palestinian people
Right.
to use really the tools that were used. Most of us remember South Africa, and Cindy was just talking about the deals there. To break the apartheid situation there. And so it's a call to do the same thing, to continue to boycott and sanctions. So sanctions that actually be by a state, by divestment. So you don't want to profit from this occupation. You don't want to participate in it, and you want to get our country to be there until the occupation ends. So
Right.
it's very specific. And so we have supported that. Actually, friends of ours, but not really the foundation, were active in Olympia to get the food co-op in Olympia to say that it wasn't going to sell any more Israeli goods. Now, they only had, I think, 5, but they did vote to do that and have carried that out, and that became very contentious when some activists from Israeli-supported activists
Right.
sued on the other side. But it was interesting. I'm kind of a conservative guy, although I am a member of Veterans for Peace, which is not the most conservative group I've ever been a part of. But my background is in insurance. I was an insurance executive. But it was interesting. It was good for me to sit down and hear a judge say, well, in the United States, we actually have a rich history of boycotts. And I thought, what? Isn't there something about a tea boycott at one time?
That's right.
Yeah, that's right. This really did start before the United States. And then a judge saying, and in terms of learning about and being interested in and discussing having free speech about the Middle East, about Israel and Palestine, it's high time we did that. Of course, that's protected free speech.
Right.
So just right from the get-go, the judge thought that was a reasonable thing to do, although it's all being appealed to the Washington State Supreme Court. But that was interesting. So anyway, as a group, we have supported that, and as an individual, I support that. I think we were discussing it. Cindy and I have had really kind of the privilege of living actually in Israel, in Haifa, for 9 months. About total, it had to do with a lawsuit that we're bringing forward there.
Right.
But anyway, we were there for a long time, so we have a lot of Israeli friends. And I know we were at a dinner party once, and these people who are, of course, very sympathetic to ending the occupation, although there's Jewish Israelis, but they're also academics, so they didn't really want to be boycotted. And at that time, I didn't understand that if they're only representing themselves coming to the United States, it wouldn't be boycotted. They're only boycotted if they're representing an institution that is part of the occupation, which almost all universities are there, as well as U.S. universities, and be involved in our war effort. But anyway, one of them was saying, well, I don't really like this, you know, why do you support it? And I finally said, oh, well, personally, that's not hard, because I have personally tried every other avenue to attack this, you know.
Well, I mean, there's a fine example. I mean, South Africa. It's the same thing, you know. People decided during the apartheid movement they were going to divest. And I was part of groups of people that were very active in that, getting our university, actually even our synagogue, you know, I was going to, I converted to Judaism after my child passed away, looking for something that I wasn't satisfied in my spiritual life, and I raised my daughter as a young Jewish girl, and she went to Portland Jewish Academy. And I remember as she's growing up, you know, and going through the school, there was an Israeli kid that came into the classroom, and there was a picture of a Palestinian kid. He went over and spit on it. Mm. Well, I mean, it's not unusual for kids to act out what they've heard, especially just coming straight to this country. But my daughter and another young woman, one of my friends of mine, a professor at Portland State, his daughter, both rose up and said, this isn't right. That's a human being. And people, they discuss, these are kids, you know, little kids in grade school. And I'm going, my God, this is incredible, you know, I'm glad. But I remember, you know, tzedakah was supposed to be, you're supposed to give something at certain times of the year. There was a move to I don't know, plant a tree in Israel. And my daughter came to me and says, well, I'm supposed to be working on this project. I says, honey, we don't do that. Because that means they're going to plant trees in occupied area, the Palestinians' land, and pull down those their houses and plant trees and move it out. We can't do that. I'm trying to explain that to a child to understand that stuff. And there's so much when you think about it. So when we go back to Rachael on this thing, I mean, what we're talking about is what is happening between the Israelis and especially Gaza, which is really being sort of a outdoor prison that's been surrounded. And I've had Ann Wright and other people here from the Gaza Ark also come to speak, and to take those flotillas and try and go into the coast. And they have made it there a few times. So, but it's very interesting that, you know, products, they're even talking about, what is it, the certain calories, a certain amount of level of calories that will be allowed to be imported in to control the diet of the people. Could you talk a little bit about how this affected Rachael, and when did she get involved with the Israeli movement?
Well, it was really 9/11 that motivated Rachael to start thinking about this in a big way. I think, you know, for her, I sort of equate it to what I think the Kennedy assassination was for me. I was 16 when that happened, and it was so stunning to me. And of course, 9/11 was bigger in many, many ways. And and she was a college student, but she really set out to figure out what's going on. Why did this happen? Because it was very disruptive to her life and everybody around her. She was a student at the Evergreen State College. In Olympia, we have, you know, a lot of very informed, activists who at that time, and they just, you know, really started to become very energized in opposing the U.S. response to 9/11, war in Afghanistan, war in Iraq. So there were new peace groups, the Olympia Movement for Justice and Peace. There was one, Olympians for Peace in the Middle East. Fellowship of Reconciliation was already there, but people started moving towards those groups because they felt compelled to get involved, and she became involved. She was also part of a program at Evergreen called Local Knowledge. Evergreen has an integrated education, so this was a year-long program with 2 faculty, same group of students together for the entire year. The idea was to dig deeply into our own local history, which she did, and worked in that, has written about it in a book of her writing that we have, Let Me Stand Alone. She writes about some of those discoveries. But this class started right after 9/11 happened. And so the class also, I think, started to dig deeply for, what's going on here in the Middle East. And it led her to Israel-Palestine as being a wound, an ongoing problem, and she became more interested. In 2002, some of her friends went to the area with the International Solidarity Movement. It was really just getting started that time in something called Freedom Summer. And there was a call for internationals to come and to stand with Palestinians who during a very violent period wanted to use nonviolent resistance to oppose the occupation. And her friends wrote about their experiences, and definitely word went out that there was a need for more internationals to go there. So she started to really immerse herself in the issue, was reading a lot, was also educating us.
Yeah, I was going to ask. What did conservative father think at the time when your daughter's going to Evergreen and getting involved?
I really had hoped that she could find a soup kitchen somewhere, but she did all this. She educated herself. She was responsible about it, and one of the gifts that we have, probably in a sense because she was killed, is that we got to see her journals, and they came into the books. So then you could see what she was thinking about. We, in some ways, we got to know her really well after she was killed, because there's all this internal conversation when we're seeing, in some ways, a very typical teenager who may, they're always in your heart, but sometimes they're in your face too. And particularly
I know that.
as a conservative. And in my office, I was thought of as a liberal. It depends on who's viewing what. But anyway, yeah. It was, she had to bring us along, and most of that education went to Cindy, who had the time to follow it.
I had the time. Craig and I, because of a job change, were in North Carolina, and Rachael was in Olympia at Evergreen. But she broke the news that she was thinking about going there, and then she started to give me books to read. When I would come back to Olympia, she had checked out films from the Evergreen Library for us to watch together, documentaries, and then we talk about them after. I always remember one that was about checkpoints specifically, and she was asking me what I thought about it, and it was new to me because we were not tied to this issue at all. Right. I was active with my kids' schools and all that kind of thing, but I wasn't politically active around issues like the Middle East. Right. And then I went through a checkpoint, the first big one in Kalandia, near Ramallah, next to Ramallah, in 2003 after Rachael was killed, and that was a very emotional moment for me because I remembered Rachael trying to bring some understanding of this to me, and I hadn't internalized what it really meant. And I was standing in this space. It wasn't a very big area. It's different now in Ramallah than it was then. But all of these Palestinians we stood for a half hour, which wasn't a particularly bad day there. But there was a Palestinian father holding on to his little child's hand. We're all just packed into this area while one by one we get to go through the checkpoint. I was with Huwaida Arif, who was one of the co-founders of the ISM at the time. Nothing terrible happened at the checkpoint that day, although young men were being pulled out to the side and questioned off to the side and so forth by the military. But all of a sudden, I felt just a bit of the oppression of being in that situation and realizing that for these Palestinians, this was a day-to-day event, to have to be able to try to go through there to get to the other side for work or whatever, for medical treatment, for education or whatever.
You hear the stories of people who lost their family members. I mean, and I know when I lost my child, I began to think, how can we as Americans pay our taxes to buy bullets and guns to kill other people's children. It just made no sense
Yeah.
to me. And I realized, you know, that pain, it's like people think, well, those people don't feel the same way we do. Those people don't understand. I mean, how can anybody think like I became so angry. It took a long time for me to be able to try and put this together in my head and realize that people just don't know what's going on. And that's what Rachael was trying to do, is bring that to the attention of people. And as you're trying to do, and as Veterans for Peace is trying to do, people everywhere are trying to get people to talk to each other. One thing I wanted to mention, because you reminded me on the date, was that I want to announce that we have Veterans for Peace is going to be presenting the Mossadegh Awareness Begets Sanity in Foreign Policy Thursday, June 13th at the Peace House. And Moji Aga is the founder of the Mossadegh Legacy Institute. And Ann Huntworth, who's over at the Meninoia Peace House, will also be speaking. She's been to Iran a number of times. And this is at 2116 Northeast 18th Avenue. It's right off about 18th and Tillamook. It's a beautiful place. We're going to have a dinner and event and the event in the evening. So it'll start about 7 p.m. for the dinner, and then a little later after that. So if people want to find out more, they can just give me a call or email me. My email is djshea@hotmail.com. That's djshea@hotmail.com, and I can send you more information about that. But again, that's, this country, when it comes to the Middle East, has been, like many colonial nations and empires, has take out somebody who's democratically elected and put somebody in who is their puppet. And we see this happening all over the world. And when I came back, I mean, I didn't want to think about Vietnam, I remember being involved in the Central American conflicts, the 1980s, and trying to stop intervention there, and being part of the sanctuary movement and immigrants coming into this country. It happens here in this country, where we're still attacking immigrants coming into this country. You talk about, they build a wall along the border. Well, the big thing in Gaza and the West Bank is the walls that's being separating people. And what does that mean to the people that live in Gaza?
Well, Dan, it's kind of incredible, because as you bring that up, of course, the major contractors for the wall that we're building, which is along our border,
right.
I haven't gone down to look. I'm assuming that wall is at least a foot inside the U.S. border, if the U.S. is building it. But the major contractors come from Israel, because they had this experience.
Wow.
In Gaza, the wall there, sometimes it's fenced, sometimes it's wall, but there is divided. Gaza is sealed off. There's no longer actually settlers inside Gaza as there were when Rachael was there. There were actually Jewish Israeli settlers there, about 7,000 of them, I think, and they were protected by over 20,000, I think like 25,000 troops that were there to protect them, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense and probably explains why they were taken out. But now, and some people might say, well, now it's not, it's not, it's under siege, I guess is the way I would say it. And as a side, I would say about that we were actually talking to a very high-ranking national security officer in the old executive office building of the White House a few years ago after the attack on the Mavi Mamar. And he opened that by saying, what's clear now is that the siege of Gaza is a failed policy. But it has changed very little, so we've spent another couple of years without that.
Well, let's say something.
Okay, we got about four things going here.
Mavi, how do you say it again?
Mavi Mamar.
Mavi Mamar.
Yeah.
Was one of the flotillas. People may not know what that was about. You might just give them
In what year was that? I'm forgetting. 2010.
2011. I think.
11.
Yeah.
There was a large flotilla, a number of boats trying to go into Gaza and break the siege of it. And one of those boats was really a fairly large ship
Right.
coming from Turkey, and it had mostly Turkish citizens on that, and was, I think, largely supported by one charity there. But it was coming into in the middle of the night. I think Cindy was listening real time, following that. Maybe you can say your experience.
And I think I
because you were
misspoke. I
following.
think it was 2010 now. The time gets
Right,
confusing
I know.
after a while. But I was following what was happening because there was a flotilla, so a number of boats. And you could, they were, I don't know how this happens, but they were transmitting live so we could hear about the progress of these boats. And there, through the internet, I would see these messages come up that they had seen, you know, some Israeli boats in the distance and that kind of thing, but they were moving forward. Everything seemed to be going well. The phone rang at home. I went and answered the phone, came back just a few minutes later from the phone conversation, looked at the screen as these messages were coming through, and all of a sudden it said 3 people dead. And then the numbers grew, and it took some time before we determined, you know, how many people had actually been killed. But it was the Turkish boat, the Mavi Marmara.
Yeah.
It was a large one. I forget the number now, but hundreds of people were on that boat.
Right.
It was about 4 a.m. in the morning, I believe. It was dark. Israeli boats came up to these boats. We had friends who were on other boats. Ann Wright was on a
Right,
smaller
right.
one, Hueda Araf, and they talked about their experience being boarded and how terrifying that really is, and how you're not sure what's going to happen and so forth. But in the course of the Israelis boarding, I mean, there was live fire. Many people were killed. It was a terrible situation, and it's been largely condemned all around the world. The Turkish government is still remaining very firm about needing to have accountability for what happened to their citizens. One was an American citizen living in Turkey, but he was born in the United States, Furkan Dogan. Craig and I have had the opportunity to be in Turkey for a week in Istanbul. The play, My Name is Rachael, Corrie. It's funny how these stories work. But the play, My Name is Rachael, Corrie, now has really been all over the world, translated into many languages. And one of the places where it's been performed is in Turkey. Interestingly enough, the actress who did it there, Set and I, went to school in Corvallis. Went to college in Corvallis. Yeah, she's from Turkey. She's from Istanbul. Her mother was an exchange student in Corvallis. Teacher, and she came and spent a year, I think, during high school, and decided she wanted to come back and go to college there, so that's what she did. Her theater teacher at the university did also a production of My Name is Rachael, Corrie, and we met Set and I in Corvallis the first time, and she said, I'm translating this into Turkish. I'm going to do it in Turkey. And so when that happened, she invited us. We went to Istanbul to see it, which was not long after the incident with the Mavi Marmara. Craig, I have a bit of acrophobia, and the ship, it was a big ship. It was in dry dock.
It was back in dry dock, but I got to go up in a tour with the captain of it. So I saw some of the inside on the bridge, inside in the bridge, there were bullet holes that were still there. After the ship had been disabled at sea, I'm forgetting now exactly how they did that, whether there's nets in the propeller or something, was taken into shore, but the Israelis had full control over that, and then they ended up draining the oil out of the engines and running the engines. They took the wrong electricity and put it through all the electric. Basically, it came back as kind of just a shell. So it was in dry dock trying to rebuild all this stuff that they just gratuitously destroyed. And of course, it was attacked at high sea.
Right.
It was not going in Israel's waters. It was going into Gaza. And it's just part of a policy that is incredibly destructive that I think we have all over the Middle East in a lot of ways. And I think that Cindy and I have traveled there, as you mentioned, but a number of times, and actually lived in Israel. for part of that time. But the United States just really has very little positive impact there. I mean, we don't have the ability anymore because nobody likes us, nobody trusts us. And it is remarkable that really our daughter is one of the Americans, the one with the big name, that people all over that region know of her, and just they say, but she came from the United States to be with us, you know, and people are amazed at that. And then they know there are Americans at a grassroots level who will come. That gives a different picture, and it's important.
There's when I think of that too, I mean, she stood out in front of that bulldozer, and I mean, I heard this statement that they didn't see her, and it just didn't seem to me that that was true. And I know that you have a lawsuit going. Are you addressing that issue at all?
Well, the lawsuit it's been a very, very long process. The position, well, to go back to the beginning, after Rachael was killed, President Bush, by telephone, was promised a thorough, credible, and transparent investigation into Rachael's killing. We know this through State Department announcements, through their press briefings. And
it was the Prime Minister
by Prime
Sharon,
Minister Sharon. And later that year, in 2003, we received word that the Israelis had completed their investigation, that no charges would be brought. And Bush had also been promised a report to the U.S. government. The Israelis declined to release their report to the U.S. government. Ultimately, some members of the State Department were able to read it, and Craig and I and some other family members eventually were able to go to the Israeli consulate in San Francisco. It's when I went to my first Veterans for Peace meeting, because they were having a convention the same time, and also at the Israeli embassy in Washington, D.C. But the military completely, found no fault at all in what happened. And the State Department at that time said, "Now we go to work, on this." And we've been working now for over 10 years, really with our government and with the Israeli government, to try to have some accountability. At the end of 2 years, in 2005, we were reaching a point where if we were going to take this any further, we had to file a lawsuit, or the statute of limitations would prevent us from doing that. By that time, we'd received a letter from Colin Powell's chief of staff, Lawrence Wilkerson, and he said, when we asked, how do you assess what you read in this document about the investigation, the military police investigation that happened, and does it meet the standard of being thorough, credible, and transparent? And he said that he could say unequivocally that what they read did not lead them to believe that that was the case. So but the U.S. also, we've actually been in many congressional offices. At one point, we had been in every congressional office, but of course, members of Congress change. We've been in the State Department many times. We have people there that I think care deeply and have really tried to help us. We went to the Justice Department, and we were told that there was only a very limited statute under which the U.S. could actually try to investigate and have an investigation, and that they didn't think that statute was written with the intention of using it in this way. It had been used against Indonesia when American citizens were killed or implicated in a killing of American citizens by a military there. But the fact that it was Israel in this case, I think, was the problem from everything we could tell. But we filed a lawsuit. The first testimony was in March of 2010. We had, I think, 15 court dates, but there's no jury in Israel. There's only a judge that hears it. He's hearing other cases as well. We were quite naive when we went into it. We didn't realize this process, how different it would be from legal processes in the U.S., although they take time here too. But it took, to have those 15 court dates, took until July of 2011 when we had the last testimony. And then the attorneys wrote summaries. They don't have oral summaries, and there's a long process of writing. The judge, this was Haifa District Court. This is the middle level of, there are 3 layers of Israeli courts. This was the middle level. The judge gave his verdict on August 28th of last year, 2012, and Craig and I and our daughter Sarah were in the courtroom, along with, I have to say, a horde of media. There was great amount of media attention to it. There was also human rights organizations throughout were there. American embassy officials were there. The judge basically completely exonerated the Israeli military. Completely, it's almost as though all we had to do was look at what the state's attorney said on the first day, and that's kind of what the judge repeated in the verdict. So we feel that it was really advantageous to be able to hear from witnesses, although many of the primary witnesses, because of an unusual order, were able to testify from behind a screen, so we couldn't see them. That was true of the driver and of the commander. There were 2 people in the bulldozer that day. So when you ask about them not being able to see, the commander in that bulldozer is really charged with being a set of eyes. He directs the driver. He's elevated in the bulldozer. There was another bulldozer on the scene. There was an APC vehicle that was in charge of the operation, had 5 or more people in it. And there were cameras as well. There's some video of this. One of the things most troubling about the legal case is that we figured out once we got into court and saw the video that the state had brought that it was not all the video, because actually some video had been on Israeli television that was more extensive. But the lawyers and the lead investigator who testified claimed that what they had was all the video. Interestingly enough, that videotape was confiscated by high military commanders after Rachael was killed and was used in a briefing to U.S. officials, different segments of it, in which we later determined, analyzing very quickly what they saw, or very carefully what they saw, in those briefings, they tried to say Rachael was in a position where she wasn't even there, to say she couldn't be seen, that she was behind a big mound of earth. The problem with that is that they were showing a bulldozer that wasn't the bulldozer that killed Rachael in the photo, and the spot was not the spot where she was.
Well, there
located.
was we had a photo here. If they could bring that up, that'd be nice. I'd like to go through a few of these photos that you brought.
Yeah.
And you still in there? There it is.
Yeah.
This is the photo. This is one bulldozer here.
It is, and that's not the bulldozer that killed Rachael that day. And this photo was taken earlier in the day. I think one thing that's important, because many of the internationals, there were 7 international eyewitnesses there, all of whom say Rachael was visible. I mean, one of the things that you really notice is the orange jacket that she's wearing, the reflective jacket. Interestingly enough, we learned because of a film made by an Israeli French filmmaker, Simone Biton, about Rachael's case, that there was actually color video. But the court doesn't have the color video. When you look at that color video and you think, why would they have not brought that into court? It's because you can spot those orange, the bright orange.
Seems to show up for some reason. Yeah, it's strange. I think if you look at this, and again, there weren't really still shots taken right before Rachael was killed. So this is earlier in the day, but we heard in court that you couldn't see, and I think probably the visibility is difficult out of the bulldozer, but it was on rough land. So
And they knew they were there.
They knew they were there. They were
there.
doing this all day long, and the bulldozers would come up right to the feet of the activists and then stop. And so it's not as if this was just a one-time thing. Right. I think you look at this this picture, I think you can see the head of one of the operators back there. I think in real time, if people were moving, that would be more obvious. You can see that you have some vision there. There are 2 people whose responsibility it is to move around and keep track. You can see that Rachael's standing there, and I think all of that would have been true on run that actually killed her. If you listen to the Israeli Defense Forces, they'll say that you can barely see out of here. And so one of the questions, well, why don't you put a camera on there? They said, well, it would fall off, or it's very difficult to look out the window and also look at a screen. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, you probably drove a car to get here. Didn't that car have a rear view mirror? Probably 3 of them.
Right.
You know, so all of that would have been possible. To me, because we also just said maybe it was negligence. I think it was negligence to turn on a vehicle that's 65 tons if you can't tell who's in front of it.
That's
It's
right.
irresponsible. As they said they couldn't see Rachael, then one of the people up there in the cab, the bulldozer driver, he said the first time he saw Rachael was as he's pulling the bulldozer back, and that her body was between his bulldozer and the mound of earth that he was pushing. So clearly he thought he ran over her. The person responsible for really watching out there, his commander, said that you couldn't see her body. Her body, the first time he saw her body, it was behind this 2-meter-high mile of dirt lying on the ground. And so he wasn't able quite to explain why he couldn't see her standing up when there was no pile of earth because it was being pushed, but he could see her when she was lying behind it. It was obvious lying. This is a picture of Rachael. Cindy, you explain that.
Yeah, I actually love this picture.
I love this.
I love this picture, I'm pleased that you have this one because it's actually photos taken around this time were used to demonize Rachael by the opposition. This is on February, I believe it's February 15th of 2003, which was the day, if you remember, in the world when there were more people out on the street
Right.
to protest
Millions.
what looked like
We had 40,000
the Iraq
down
War
here.
coming. And Rachael had been very involved in the anti-war movement in Olympia, opposing the Iraq War. And here she was in Gaza, and she wanted to be out there with the people and the children of Gaza. She wrote, it was funny because when we got home, Craig and I were at a protest against the war in Charlotte, North Carolina, where we lived. We got home and there was a phone message, and she wrote, "Mom, I just have to tell," or she said on the phone, "Mom, I have to tell you that there's this, I've just seen this picture of me on the wire, and I look like a mad woman." And she wrote to a friend of ours in Brazil, former exchange student of ours, and she said, "I look like I'm opening my mouth wide enough so a bird could fly into it." But she said what she was hollering was, "Hurrah, Palestine, hurrah, Iraq, freedom for Palestinians, freedom for Iraqis." And
She told us,
Yeah.
because you can see she's burning, and that's a crayon drawing of American flag, which of course in this country gets a lot of flack.
yeah.
But anyway, she wrote, before she did that, she wrote the names of the corporations that would profit from the
Two people,
occupation of Iraq.
two of the activists that were there that day, one I had met at
We
two
need to
different
go.
occasions, told me that she had penciled in the names of
This
all
is
the
a street
corporations.
sign in Ramallah on the West Bank of Gaza, and so I think that was in 2010, because we were there on March 16th, I believe 2010.
yes, it was.
That was dedicated to Rachael and to the other international activists that have come to be with the Palestinians. So that was a pretty special day.
Well, it's a very appropriate sign because it has a direction. It says, you know, some people have direction. And I think we need to, you know, be critical of what we hear in the news, and we have to be critical of our foreign policy, and we have to try and make choices between those and find some sort of direction in which we can lead our lives in a moral and sane way. And we need to, you know, I'm with Veterans for Peace, which is obvious. I'm for peace.
Yeah.
But I'm also against nation states per se. I would like to see that we have erase all borders and we become one human family. And I want to thank you. I know that we ran out of time here, but I want to thank you both for coming down
Thank you.
Thank
to
you.
this
It's
program.
been
And
very good,
I
Dan.
wish we had even more time.
It's great
This
to talk
dinner.
with you.
Thank you.